crock walks into a bar? No, seriously.
Even on the morning after budget night, the Northern Territory News sticks to its own agenda. But surely the budget featured as the second lead? Well, no.
The squeeze is on, and we're not talking about the budget.
A stunned group of Territory dinner party guests watched on as this huge python dropped in on them with an adult possum in its grip.
They do love their wildlife in the Territory. Welcome to Media Watch. I'm Jonathan Holmes. In New South Wales and Queensland, they love their rugby league. And the story all week has been the Four Corners programme, Code of Silence. It exposed the role of footy show star Matthew Johns in a group sex incident that happened in New Zealand 7 years ago. The programme split the league-loving part of the country in two. Posts to Four Corners' own website are typical of thousands.
I'm 26, male, and a great fan of Matty Johns. He's been trialled and found guilty by gossip. She went willingly, she stayed willingly.
I am absolutely disgusted in the manner in which women are treated by both players and sports bodies.
And that's the two sides of the argument in a nutshell. One side saying issues of consent and legality are beside the point. The other saying they're fundamental. And the media reporting, including the Four Corners programme itself, has lined up on one side or the other. In the week before the programme went to air, the Nine Network tried to soften the coming blow to one of its stars by a preemptive counterattack, concentrating on the law. League reporter Danny Weidler broke the news.
Johns is one of several Sharks players investigated for sexual assault. He was cleared of any wrongdoing by police, but the incident is about to become an issue again on an upcoming Four Corners programme.
He wasn't cleared of any wrongdoing, Danny. The New Zealand police decided not to press criminal charges. That's not the same thing. That Sunday, still before the Four Corners programme aired, Danny Weidler waded back into the fray in Sydney's Sun Herald.
John's guilty of crude act, but here is the lowdown.
The lowdown, the inside story, the real story. What we got, though, was simply Johns' version of events.
Johns and a teammate had sex with the woman. When other players entered the room and began to watch what was happening, Johns backed out. The woman requested that Johns have sex with her again. Her request was made in the crudest of terms.
The subtext is plain to read. She was begging for it, and blokes will be blokes. Served up to his readers as if it were indisputable fact. And he went on,
I spoke with Johns about this matter 7 years ago. Because he had not been charged and his marriage was on the rocks, I did not expose him.
Mates rules. The rules that journos with specialist rounds, police reporters, sports reporters, political reporters all too often follow. What happens on tour stays on tour. Keep your contacts sweet and your friendships solid. But the rules don't apply to outsiders. 2 months ago, when Manly star Brett Stewart was embroiled in sexual assault allegations, Danny Weidler thought it was fine to report this.
Peter, the development is that the girl's father spent a considerable amount of time in jail as a result of pleading guilty to fraud.
The alleged victim's father's criminal record had no relevance at all. But Nine is the footy channel and Weidler is deeply in league with the league. But after last Monday night, no one could go on ignoring the anonymous woman at the heart of the Four Corners story. The effect of her distress was devastating. Four Corners deliberately left aside the issue of whether the girl had consented at the time to what occurred.
Four Corners doesn't say that what took place in room 21 of the Racecourse Hotel was sexual assault. But a woman involved in degrading group sex can still be traumatised, whether she consents or not.
Lots of people, especially but not only women, agreed. Aussie Rules reporter Caroline Wilson.
Just because there weren't police charges laid, those men in that room clearly had all the power. The woman didn't.
Tracy Grimshaw on A Current Affair.
She was 19 years old. She was naked. She was outnumbered. There was a very clear power imbalance in that room, wasn't there?
League stalwart Andrew Voss on last week's footy show.
The issue of consent is gone. It is not the point here. It is the degradation of women is the point of this issue. Respect for women.
But some journos, or their editors, were determined that consent should be the issue. On Thursday night, 9 News ran this.
Tanya Boyd was a workmate of the woman who had sex with Johns and several Sharks players.
She was bragging about it to the staff and quite willing, openly saying that how she'd had sex with several players. There was no trauma whatsoever. 2GB
broadcaster Alan Jones repeated that claim next morning and added,
"They're talking about cultural change. Well, I think one of the cultural changes that needs to be made is for the media to start trying to report the truth of these matters. That'd be a start."
Ah, the truth. It may well be true that the woman boasted about her Sharks encounter immediately afterwards. It's certainly true that 5 days later she made a complaint to police, and in the years since she's been traumatised by the memory. Nobody has contradicted this.
Psychiatrists reported that she was suicidal, had cut her wrists several times, and bought a rope to hang herself with.
But never mind that. All week, a pack of news hounds have been slavering on her trail in Christchurch. Channel 7 struck gold with John Butterfield. He's the owner of the Racecourse Hotel and drops in every week or two. This is mere second-hand gossip.
She just did nothing but tell all the staff what a great night she had, and to put it quite crudely, had the whole team in bed with her.
7's Lee Janasek then tried to buy respectability by finding a rape counsellor to tell us that that means nothing. This morning, the Daily Telegraph's Janet Fife Yeomans managed to get Butterfield to go a step further.
"She told a whole bunch of lies,"
said Mr. Butterfield.
"I was really brassed off about it all, that a member of staff would do this in the hotel."
But the Cronulla Sharks, said Mr. Butterfield,
were a great bunch of guys.
Same old subtext. She was begging for it. Blokes will be blokes. Good one, Janet. As for 9 News' Mark Burrows, he excelled himself on Friday night with this. In his Sun Herald column yesterday, Danny Weidler was back on the attack.
"It's my understanding the head policeman who featured in the show is far from impressed with the angle and facts that Four Corners chose to present."
That is simply nonsense. Danny Weidler never spoke to Detective Sergeant Neville Jenkins. mediawatch did this morning. He told us he hadn't seen the Four Corners programme because...
"I was away last week in hospital having surgery. The only reporter I have ever spoken to was Four Corners' Sarah Ferguson, and she was really good."
Detective Sergeant David Long, who's been the police spokesman on the matter, also told us he's made no comment on the Four Corners programme. But Weidler went on...
Four Corners didn't touch on the fact that the girl left the late afternoon romp with at least one other Sharks player. He has told teammates she was not distressed.
Romp? Well, who'd be distressed by a romp?
It didn't touch on the fact she boasted about her night to workmates the next day. That didn't suit the story.
Four Corners responded to that allegation like this.
Four Corners had never heard of Tanya Boyd before her account was published last week. Four Corners drew on police material dealing with Claire's complaint that said comments made by Claire were a mechanism for dealing with what had happened.
What do I think? Well, I think if Four Corners knew that Claire had boasted about the event, it should have dealt briefly with that issue. But it wouldn't have altered the fundamental point made eloquently last week by league guru Phil Gould.
From the time the blokes walk into the room, the extra party, they're in the wrong. And even if they feel as though she gives consent at that time, it's still going to end up wrong.
And in my view, that made Four Corners right to air what Phil Gould called its sledgehammer blow. And now to a story that should have been reported, but wasn't. 3 weeks ago, Fairfax Media Papers made a